Hi guys, this is Christy with Your Insurance Explained, and over the next few weeks I'm going to be going over terms that you may see on an auto declarations page and going in depth with each of those terms. Now, I have a video that I did a while back on just what a declarations page is, and I will link that below. So the first term we're going to go over is liability. It may show up on your declarations page in a couple different ways. My declarations page says liability to others. It may say liability limits. It may say BIPD liability. It also may say bodily injury, property damage liability. Liability is what you're responsible for if you cause an accident and someone in another vehicle or other vehicles is injured. The first term that you see under liability is generally bodily injury or BI limits. That is what is paid out if someone in another vehicle is injured because of the accident that you caused. It may show up a couple of different ways. You may have two numbers like 50, 100, or you may have just one number, 100. If you have two numbers under your bodily injury, the first number is what will pay out per person, so $50,000. The second number is what will pay out for bodily injuries that result because of the whole accident, $100,000. So if there are three people in the car that each have $50,000 worth of injuries, it will pay out $50,000 per person, but it'll only pay out $100,000 total. So what would happen in that case is that once the limits on your policy are reached, the injured party would start working with their insurance and their underinsured motorist insurance to get the rest of their bills paid for. If you only have one number, that means you have an aggregate limit or a single limit liability. That means there's no per person limit. It's just a limit for the whole thing. The next term you'll probably see is property damage. And property damage liability is the property that was damaged as a result of your accident. This can be a vehicle, say you ran into a fence or a mailbox. That's also property damage. This is generally just one number, say 50,000. Liability limits are incredibly important. As you can see, there can be situations where your limits are reached, and if the other person doesn't have insurance or their insurance doesn't cover the rest of their costs too, they can come back to you and try to get the money from you. Every state has a specific amount of liability limits that you have to cover to be legal on your vehicle. I live in Kansas, and I think our limits, the lowest limits we can do here are 25,000, 50,000, 10,000. But if you think about that, 25,000, 50,000 isn't a terrible amount for bodily injury, but if you think about 10,000 for property damage, most cars are worth more than that. And a quick word of caution about minimum liability limits. It's not something I ever recommended for my insureds because those minimum liability limits are incredibly low. I think they're low in Kansas at 25,000, 50,000, 10,000, but there are states that are even lower than that. So it's something you need to think about when you're starting your policy. Are these limits going to be high enough to cover me if something happens? I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, leave them below.